Awesome. So, welcome everybody to this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Really a treat to be joined today by Raveena Mehta. Raveena, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I absolutely love the conversations that you have with artists and just entrepreneurs and people around the world. So thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for saying that. I was thinking this morning of all the different times when creative kind of inspiration comes our way,
hmm
and I was curious for you particularly, how often do you dream about music, and how do you maybe capture that inspiration in those moments when you kind of least expect them to happen?
Oh wow, that is such an incredible question. I dream about music really often, and I think that's partly because that's all I do. In my day, I'm either painting or creating art through music or drawing, painting. And for me, what I end up doing is I wake up if it's something that's really got me excited in the middle of my sleep. I end up waking up and taking a little voice memo,
Mm,
voice note of
yeah,
either if it's like notes or like humming, and
right.
I've honestly gotten some really beautiful melodies through dreams. And I think that's a beautiful way in which your subconscious is speaking to you. It's things that are
Right.
stemming from you, and I think it's just another outlet. Um, yeah,
That's handy to have those voice notes nearby.
yeah,
I mean,
it
those
is.
times they say people like, when they're driving or when they're in the shower or, they're just doing something that's completely thoughtless, and yet,
Mhm.
there's this kind of flash of inspiration comes in. For you, does that is it a little bit different than when you're trying to intentionally capture that, or you're working in the studio and I'm sure it must be much more magical when those two things are happening at the same time.
100%. I think, honestly, for me, I'm someone that's very guided by my environment. I
Yeah.
think the energy in spaces and people, they really kind of guide my experience of whether it's just living on a day-to-day basis, which is can be quite jarring as well because
Yeah.
you're making yourself vulnerable to a lot of things and people. But at the same time, when it comes to music, I think it's just a beautiful way in which I think when your environment around you allows you to kind of um, stem or like kind of gauge some kind of, I don't know, whether it's inspiration or whether it's some kind of just feeling of like, wow, that felt kind of transcendental and like
Mm,
I feel something.
yeah.
I think that's very special. And I think I think those two things generally do have to go hand in hand, but
Right.
there are times when you're at the studio and you're on like a deadline and you need to get things done that you have to really draw inspiration from the depths of you. And
Mm.
um, and I think that's a very powerful thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, especially to
Yeah.
get motivated, sometimes you need kind of structure and framework, to
Yes.
it, whether it's a deadline or someone even pushing you. And you're someone who
100%.
has collaborated and worked with so many very talented people in many different
Thank you.
spaces. So how can you tell when working with someone artistically or professionally or even in a creative way? How can you
hmm
tell when that partnership is really clicking?
Um, so I think I generally am able to gauge through initial or prior conversations to us even getting into the studio.
Yeah.
Um, I think for me, leading with authenticity is really important. So in all of my interactions with artists or creators or, like whoever I'm working with, I want to be 100% me and allow that to kind of guide the interaction as well. Um, but I think it's not always that you're going to have like 100%, harmony but I think what you can do is put up your end of it and just
Mm,
be like, look, I'm going to be honest and I'm going to be me and put the best, my best self out there.
yeah.
And you're just hoping that, the other person's doing the same thing and wants to create something, um, really special. And I think when it comes to like creating, I think it's like anything, whether you're creating art, whether you're creating a business, whether you're creating something from nothing. And I think there's so much energy and power in that,
Yeah.
um, that I think if you're putting your best foot forward, I do believe that generally people reciprocate.
Do you feel that comfort when, initially, of course, there's always kind of an orientation to get to know somebody in the artistic
Hmm.
space, but when as you find yourself becoming more comfortable with being uncomfortable,
Right,
or vulnerable,
right.
does that is that a signal that you can perhaps start like exploring and taking more risk when it comes to your creativity?
100%. I feel like something that I've learned through my own journey is that, like, I think it's at the end of, or I think it's through discomfort that you're
Mm,
growing, and that you're allowing yourself to, seek different kind of parts of you. I think it's really exciting. Um, and like, you do have to go through like the rough end of it sometimes to
right.
also grow, and be a better artist, but more importantly, be a better person. I think discomfort is a big part of the process, and I think being vulnerable is uh, is probably key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it almost is one of those things that when you're in a unfamiliar space,
Hmm.
you're definitely a little more guarded. But
Right.
when you feel like you're at home and around those
Yep.
who know you really well, you can kind of
Yep.
let your guard down, and it feels a little bit more comfortable to be you.
Right.
Both, artistically, and we were even talking about, even geographically, you've been in so many different
Right.
places, and have had so many, areas where you found your that variety, both
Right.
artistically and geographically, I'd say. And I wonder for you, kind of, what does that concept of home mean to you when it comes to your
Wow.
art?
I was just thinking about this actually. I think home is it's such a it's such a beautiful yet loaded word.
Right.
And I think I actually wrote something a couple of weeks ago. I was on a flight. Actually, sorry, it was about 2 months ago. On New Year's, I was coming back to the States from India, and I wrote this just like a small poem. And I think I'll just read out like the first line or something. And I think I'd said something like, "Does home exist in dualities? Do we exist in dualities?"
Yeah.
And I think there's something really like important there to me, because I think home for me means people, and the energy that people kind of bring, because I think spaces, this may sound a bit like uh vague, but I
That's
think
okay.
spaces and like material things are fleeting. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that I've kind of learned through moving around and through experiencing, like being able to kind of find my own happiness, even sometimes when it's out of my control. Because, sometimes
Sure.
you, like I was brought up in Belgium. I moved when I was 11 years old to India,
Yeah.
and then moved again. Those are drastically different environments, but I
Right.
still considered both home. And then moved from India to the UK for university, back home to India, and then moved here after getting married last year.
Right.
And I think through that you just realize the evolution of your identity
Yeah.
in and you're just constantly growing. And I think home becomes kind of like it's almost like a medium to just allow you to
Hmm.
kind of be your best self, allow you to grow. And but I do think home as like a material concept is fleeting, and I think it's more internal. But I think you can
Yeah.
be your own home. Yeah.
Right. I was just going to say that it's probably less about the location and the space and environment, more
Yeah.
about your kind of inner piece of what that home means, whether it's the people you're attached to or
I,
the art that you're actually conceptualizing there.
yeah. Yeah.
Has that appreciation for you know finding that concept of home, no matter
Hmm.
where you are, has that translated to, a different way to be creative and express yourself at the same time? Meaning that,
100%.
you maybe have a little bit more adaptability and flexibility with what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I think so. I think something that I have learned, especially even over the last year, where I've never lived in the States, and so I moved here and have moved to this beautiful city in Tampa, and I've spent the last year here. And I think I've honestly, as a person, probably I've just grown so much through also the discomfort of kind of knowing that you're in an environment where you don't have your infrastructure. You are
Right.
kind of, you know, in a way you're on your own, and you need to now just make sure that you are doing what you need to do.
Right.
Especially if you're someone that's guided by your environment and
Mm.
by like people around you. Like somewhat of like a chameleon, where like your kind of your environment
Right.
like allows you to, just kind of be
Almost be a
different versions.
shapeshifter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think something that moving here, just as a more recent um, anecdote as well, or like just experience, has really like taught me the importance of, I think, also just having like taking the time. Sometimes I think taking a step back or taking two steps back to go five steps forward
Yeah.
is really important, because the reality is that inspiration doesn't stem out of anywhere. I think it either you seek it, either it's you're in an environment and you're able to gauge it and do something with it. But if you're not feeling it, then what do you do?
Right.
And it's your job, so it's part of what you do. It's your work. It's not just a hobby. Uh, so
Yeah.
so
Do you
so
do
then
you
it,
get
yeah.
when you realize those moments?
Hmm.
Does it help kind of to get unstuck, if you will? Because some people, of course, you can get very, very stuck in that situation and feel like you're
Yeah,
trapped. Um,
yeah.
and others might respond to saying, "Well, look, this is great. I'm here to explore and discover more about myself and become unstuck." And does that process also translate to how you work professionally?
It does. I think for me, whenever I do feel stuck, I take it as something that's it's part of my journey, right? It's
Yeah.
part of my own growth, and um, I've been stuck at different points in my life, and had I not had those experiences, I wouldn't be the person I am today. And if I'm proud of where I stand today, those were integral to getting me here.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I just see it like that. So even if it is, a time in your life where you're feeling a little bit underwater and you're trying to figure things out, and you might not see the light just
Mm.
yet. But I think just having the faith that, like, this is just part of a greater journey. This is just
Right.
like a little blip. And,
Yeah.
or it's the most important thing to happen, and you'll only be able to see that later.
Yeah.
So I think just, maybe I think that's what helps me, kind of operating with a little bit of like just faith, and just peace of mind, where you're prioritizing peace of mind over everything else.
Yeah. And almost like you're embracing a little bit of discomfort and creative tension, and this kind of
Yeah,
fuels you a little bit too. Um,
exactly.
I'm always curious about. I'm always struck by artistic, venues and vehicles and what they might offer artists and creators. So I'm curious whether music and the art of music and the creation of
Hmm.
music offers for you a shelter or a retreat or something like a sanctuary of privacy to escape, or rather is it a big open space to jump into and more like have a party? um, or maybe it's both actually.
I think for me, it ends up being, I think it can be a little bit of both. I think it almost depends on, where I'm at. But I do think that for me, going into the studio, like over here, I have a small walk-in closet that I've converted into a studio room.
Right.
And for me, that space is, it's my sanctuary. It's where
Yeah.
I can be, um, almost whoever I want to be, or it's also where I can be a very raw self. And
Mm,
I feel that way in my home. I feel that way with my closest people. But I think what music and art gives me is meditation, and
yeah.
and I think the ability to really get engulfed into something and kind of separate myself from. But it's not as an escape. It's just more for like my own inner, just my inner peace, which I have mentioned before. But like it genuinely is for that. It just helps me
Yeah.
just operate in like just like a calmer way where I'm just like, okay, this felt good. Yeah.
Yeah, I almost feel like that's a great way to blend the two, right? I mean, it's a sanctuary for inner peace, and yet when you're there,
Yeah.
having that inner peace almost feels like a party,
Yes, exactly.
you know?
Exactly. I think for me, like since I was very young, I grew up around my grandparents and a lot of family, and I think through conversations that I've had with them as well, where there was a massive just prioritization of, inward thinking and reflection and introspection and being good. Um, my family, they're Jain, which is wherein they follow like the principles. Jainism follows principles of like ahimsa,
Yeah.
and which is nonviolence. And like I think, while I think like for me, taking some of those things that I've learned really like through like things I've read or through my grandparents at really young ages, I'm able to in a way adapt or kind of instill those values in like
Mm,
my own way. Those are my own values today. But
right.
like I do that through, it's not in it's more in the form of spirituality,
Mm,
through religion, through music or through art,
right.
where it just allows me to just be at like a, you know, good, just happy state of mind.
Yeah, and I imagine that that's the best vehicle by which you can
Yeah.
almost practice that spirituality and like express that same those principles that
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about. I was listening to Awara and even your latest remix of Jab Tu Hai Wahi, and you
Thank
know
you.
they feel a little bit more like a pivot to some more disco funk, or
Right.
even dance hall or even house kind of music where there's a little bit more of a spirit to them of
Mm-hmm.
kind of trance or dance
Yep.
or some a little bit deeper kind of disco funk, if you will. Are
Right.
these styles that you equally find as much comfort as the soul and R&B styles of some of your previous work?
That's a really good question. I would say that these styles don't come very naturally to me.
Yeah.
What comes very naturally to me is soul, R&B, neo soul. Like these are just vocally as well. I know that
Mm,
my voice rests really comfortably in those genres as well. It's what I grew up singing, and I also know that that's where I feel most confident in
yeah.
in those genres. But for me, I think when I was creating especially Avara, um, what I wanted to kind of convey through that was this idea of like feeling like being so able to be yourself and feeling liberated, but also like you're liberated on your own, but you're also liberated in the presence of your partner,
Mm,
whoever that is, a
yeah.
companion, just someone that you kind of, have taken taken the path of life with. And when I was kind of like ideating like what that means musically, I was speaking to the producers, and we were just like, I think this needs to go in like a fun kind of like upbeat, just to kind of get what you're trying to say
Yeah.
across. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. It'll be fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it speaks to that exploration, right? Of
Yeah.
saying, hey, I want to express a little bit more of that liberation and finding companionship and what that means. But
Right.
in the moment, probably, making that spirit, whether it's upbeat or whether it feels more bouncy, if
Hmm.
you will. I'm
Yep.
certainly that takes on, a new persona for you. In
Yep.
that way, um, when you branch out and explore and take risks and stretch your vocal style and
Hmm.
find more versatility with this,
Right.
does that come at the cost of mastery? Like, is being more versatile such an amazing way to promote your art and style to new listeners? And yet,
Hmm.
do you ever feel like, well, it prevents me from becoming even more of a master where I'm so comfortable?
I think that's a very it's a constant struggle I actually deal with,
Yeah,
where because I'm someone that I really enjoy the process. For me, it's like I'm a very process driven person. So when it comes to creating work, I my like spaces where I like honestly I thrive is like the slower, whether it's love songs, soul, R&B, very like almost like dreamy kind of
yeah,
and I think uh that comes naturally to me. But at the same time, I think it's kind of like the mix between like for an artist, how much of you're kind of oscillating between two sides of you, right? Like there's
sure,
the business and there's the artist in you. And especially because this is something you're doing, you're doing for, as a job, like it's also part of
right,
the work that you're doing. It's,
yeah,
that's where like I think doing things that work or like are more commercial or like while I it's a tough thing, honestly. It's like it's
yeah,
hard to it's hard as an artist to kind of find that balance between how much
right,
for you and how much for the audiences.
yeah.
But
I
I
mean,
think that's like yeah.
I know. I was just going to say it's a tough balance in that you want to express yourself creatively, and yet in order to do that at scale, you have to keep the lights on, and you have
Yes.
to make sure that the business is running and your brand is there.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
and so is it kind of a constant tug of war between those two sides, and of course when you strike a great balance, then of course it
Hmm.
harmonizes so well.
It does. Exactly. I think it is quite a tug of war.
Yeah,
But I think for most artists, it ends up becoming a little bit of a tug of war,
yeah,
especially when you're trying to put yourself out there. You're being vulnerable with your art, which is
right,
never an easy thing.
sure,
Because I think you're putting yourself out there. It's the same thing with branding yourself. It's you're still
yeah,
putting yourself out there, so it's not going to be an easy thing. There's a lot of discomfort associated in, the way perception works or the way
yeah,
self-perception works
right.
with all of this stuff. But at the same time, I think that's where you just kind of like, sorry, put your head down and you're just like, okay, let me
You right. You have to
recenter.
be comforted. You have to have that sort of self trust, if you will, and that confidence that,
Exactly.
hey, your inner self is not changing, but the again, the shape shifting and the persona
Yeah.
changes, and the vulnerability
Hun-
of putting yourself out there as different styles is not
exactly.
necessarily changing who you are. I'm curious, in each iteration with each new song, and even in making this upcoming EP,
Yes.
um, what are some of the things that with each version of what you just mentioned in making music, what are some of the things that you've kind of had to unlearn with each
Mm-hmm.
step along the way?
Ooh. I think something that I've had to unlearn, especially a bit more recently, is like while I think it's a really important thing to I think there's like a couple of things that I've had to unlearn, honestly, along the
Yeah.
way. I think one is like letting go a little bit. I
Mm,
think whether it's like letting go of your art or letting go of a process, like a process can come to fruition, and that's what it was. And I think as an artist, sometimes you get a little bit caught up where you're just like, wow, like that was amazing, and you want something to either like you like I don't think it's ever about replicating a process or replicating a feeling, but
sure.
you can anchor yourself to something. And um and I think sometimes just like learning the art of like letting go and just kind of trusting that, like, there's something else that's in store, and you're gonna grow through that. So I think
Right.
those are important things. And I think honestly, on the business end of things as well, there's been so much growth for me personally, wherein
Sure.
I think you do have to separate parts of yourself when it comes to running something in a way that's, sustainable, viable, something you see for the future.
Right.
And I think in doing that, you do have to unlearn, or rather not, maybe not unlearn, but just, tug certain parts away for a little bit, which
Yeah.
can, maybe come back out later. Like they're not gone.
Right.
But, you do have to prioritize other things as well, which I
Sure.
think, help you at different stages of life. Like at this stage in my life where, like, say I see a vision for myself, um, and I wish to operate with a vision because, I have that faith in my abilities. But
Yeah.
at the same time, like, I know that, like, I'm not anchoring myself to that
Sure.
as well.
Sure.
That, like, it's fine. Like, my path is going to change along the way, but as long as I
Right.
have like some kind of, um, I think letting go might be it. Just like,
Yeah.
having like a greater vision, but then also allowing yourself to just
Right.
navigate your way through. Yeah, not holding yourself too stringently.
Well, and that I imagine can be challenging, but again, part of the growth process. And with that, it means that you have to develop patience
Yeah,
and the ability to really kind of understand when to let go and
yeah.
how to let go in that way. I'm also curious if in making music and even adapting to be even more savvy, if you will, as both an
Hmm.
artist and even on the business side. Has
Right.
this made you a better listener of music, almost appreciating art in many forms, but also understanding, like, wow, that's wonderful and it's a beautiful piece of work, but in my listening skills, I've grown to know that this is not something I want to put out there.
Yep, yep. I think, I think, I do think that I've definitely built those skills over the years.
Yeah,
Wherein when I started out, I think I was just an active receiver of all kinds of art.
yeah,
I studied art formally as well, fine art. So for me, like, it's a lens that I genuinely see the world with even today.
right,
Um, and I studied like all kinds of art, from conceptual art, which is extremely like it's entirely conceptually driven, to, fine art, to
right.
political art. Um, but I think in that, what I've also learned is, I think through that, it has definitely made me a better listener.
Yeah,
I think today I can say that, like, when I listen to music, I know certain things that work for me, and things that don't work for me. That's not to say that they do and don't for other people.
right,
That's like a
right.
personal choice. But I do think that through my journey of like being like just from being an active receiver of art,
Mm,
I think I've been able to also kind of like sieve down and like kind of understand what really does work for me, that everything doesn't have to work for you, and that's
right.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Almost being comfortable with what doesn't make it out there.
Yeah,
And again, part of that letting go process.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I
Um,
think it all ties together. Yeah.
yeah, totally. I was thinking also a little bit about some of the, kind of value that you have. You're someone who values aesthetic, particularly a fashion aesthetic,
Yeah.
as well as it adds to sort of your persona. And I read that you describe your fashion sense as edgy chic. Um, so I'm curious. I mean, that edgy chic style, does that bleed into other areas of your life, whether that's personally or professionally? Or is it a persona, kind of like a costume that you put on and you leave it where it's at?
No, I think it definitely comes into it. It does kind of find its way into different parts of my life, and I think
Yeah.
that's mainly because I think they're actually inherently quite part of my personality as well.
Yeah.
wherein again, like going back to like something we spoke about, like do we exist in dualities, right? I
Right.
think there's so many different ways in which you um, I think that we're so multifaceted and multifaceted, very
Sure.
dynamic people as humans, right? There's no one strand that's gonna make me,
Yeah.
and you as well. So I think that's where I could actually say that, like, I think it might not be edgy and chic. That might just be from my like clothing and like things I
Right.
like to wear.
Yeah.
But I do think that it does lead into my personal life and also professionally, because I do wear these different hats. Um,
Yeah.
I value my time with family a lot. Around family, I'm wearing a different hat.
Right.
Around my professional friends and colleagues, I'm wearing a different hat.
Yeah.
And I think for someone like me, that allows me to be my best self in different areas. And they're all
Sure.
me.
Right.
They're all still versions of me and parts of me. But in order to be my best self for the people that whether it's I love and care for across all boards
Yeah.
and also me,
Right.
I think it's important to, allow yourself to just be and wear the different hats whenever you need to.
It seems like that would spell, because you embrace those multiplicities, that helps in some ways create things that are long lasting, right? Whether there's relationships, whether there's personas, whether there's great longevity to careers, making sure that you're not suppressing some of these areas or personas to make things a
Thank
little bit
you.
more longitudinal. And I'm curious about that specific aspect of things, because how do you make music and art in a
Yeah.
world where instant gratification and almost like the disposability of art and music exists so much in the marketplace?
It's honestly, it's wild. It's a wild world out there, and
Yeah.
it's insane to be an artist in a space like this as well, where
Right.
everything is very driven by your utility to the world,
Right.
and in that form, when you think of art, you're helping someone's soul. Um, and
Right.
I think, and I think again, in a more vague sense or a more metaphysical sense, I think there's no greater resource you could give. You're giving your knowledge, you're giving yourself um, through that. But I mean, in the utility standpoint, it's you're not. So it's tough. It's hard, honestly. But I think what I end up doing is I I think by nature I'm someone that keeps a very small circle around me,
Mm.
very very tightly knit, and
Yeah.
I think that allows me to kind of tune out the chaos and also allows me to kind of tune out the opinions.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's just, the set people that I have in my circle, it's those opinions that I really take in. And then the other opinions, I value them. But am I necessarily going to change my life around
Yeah.
those? Probably not. Yeah. So I
I
think it's
love how you
just,
put that, by the way. That, like, sorry, I
no,
didn't mean to
no,
interrupt you, but like this idea that the longitudinal relationship of art is how it actually feeds someone's soul, irrespective of again, how many likes something has, or how many hits or downloads something has.
doesn't matter.
And yeah, and speaking to that, I imagine that you automatically get fed that with your close circle,
Yeah,
and the rest of it helps in some ways to balance the rest of the kind of noisiness that's out there.
exactly. I think that's generally why prefer keeping, um, I think I prefer keeping a tighter circle because I think
Yeah,
being vulnerable is a scary thing again. And like, I
sure.
think when you're vulnerable with, people that like, they have your best interest and you can really like, again, it all kind of draws in together. I think if you're operating with a vision for yourself or for your life, I'm not even talking as like a career, but like if I want to see
Right.
myself somewhere when I'm 80 years old, I'm making little steps towards it. And I just want to have the right people around me on my journey,
Yeah.
honest people, people that make me a better human being, and in turn make me a better artist. And I think I think it's just that for me. Yeah.
Speaking of which, when you're feeding other people's souls with your art
Hmm.
and paying attention to how that gets nourished in your both inner circle and even taking in feedback.
Right.
I'm so curious these days how your soul is being fed. So I wanted to ask you, in a way, what's kind of on your current playlist? What's some of the
Oh,
music you're listening to that's feeding your soul?
wow,
And by the
that
way, does
is.
that reflect kind of a particular tone or temperature or
Mhm.
mood, that's going on for you right now?
Yeah, it's actually, well, I have a really insane array of music in my playlist, which is a
Yeah,
bit embarrassing because it's like it goes from like A.R. Rahman to like Ghana to who's like
right.
a rapper to it has Sade to Whitney Houston back to like Sunidhi Chauhan. Um,
Yeah.
so it's got like a mix of everything. But right now I think for me, I've been listening to a lot of Sade.
Mm,
Um, I think it's just her music. It's very
right.
invigorating and beautiful and calming. I think that's kind of where I'm at, but I also really enjoy hip hop and rap and um, yeah, there's just a lot of appreciation for all of it.
Right. Very, very eclectic. And when you are making new discoveries or again, as you mentioned, your soul is being fed and your soul is
Hmm.
being spoken to, um, does that inspire in a way or kind of spark the creativity to build some new intersections, whether that's, through listening to someone like Sade or even, a new kind of Hindi, tune. Do those intersections then become easier to explore?
100%. I think for me, kind of bringing together, whether it's culture, whether it's, I think it's a really big part of my identity as well. And I
Yeah,
think also as my kind of what I do as an artist, I think fusing my worlds together is something that I am very just constantly inspired by, like inspired by the things I see, inspired by the way I receive them
yeah,
as well, whether it's music or like, or my environment. So most definitely, I think that amalgamation of like listening to Sade and then also going back to Bombay and listening to Arijit Singh,
right.
and their worlds apart, but it's a universal language, and
Yeah.
they're conveying certain universal truths, and that's so beautiful. And I think to recognize that like music transcends time and it transcends so many borders, physical and metaphysical, and I think that's where you just begin to appreciate it in a completely different way.
Mm. Um, that appreciation and that thinking about how it, whether it's a connection that people receive through art and music, and thinking about that, I'll sort of get you out of here on this last thought, and that is, for people who might be newly discovering you, right? You're
Hmm.
on their playlist, and
Yes.
they're now seeking out some of the art that you're creating. When
Hmm.
people hear your music for the first time, how are you hoping they feel?
I hope that they feel loved, and I hope that they feel heard. Um, and and I think, and I really hope that they know that that they're honestly, I think love is at the crux of it. I just hope that they feel like they are loved,
Yeah.
and that that I get it, and we're there, and this one's for you.
Well,
Yeah.
I know that your art and music are speaking to many, and hopefully they're loving and appreciating it. Um, Raveena, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for joining us. This
Thank
was
you.
really such a treat. I hope we'll be able to connect again down the road.
Definitely. No, definitely. I would love that. This was an incredible conversation. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the questions and just the depth of the conversation.